From the agonizing break that shattered Chris Weidman's leg to the horrific skull fracture that sidelined Evangelista Santos, here are some of the worst MMA injuries that happened during fights. MMA fighters need to push their bodies to the absolute limit. But sometimes this comes at a devastating cost. A cost Chris Weidman is familiar with. It was only seconds into his highly anticipated fight against Uriah Hall at UFC 261 that a single move escalated to the worst-case scenario. Chris used all the force within his leg for a low kick to bring Hall down, but right upon impact, his leg suddenly snapped at an unnatural angle, creating a gruesome sight. Still in the moment, Weidman instinctively tried to stand on the broken leg. It was a natural reaction, but a mistake. In the heat of the moment, he didn't have a clue about the trauma until his foot hit the ground. But the horror didn't end there. The force of the impact was too much for Weidman's fibula, the smaller bone on the outside of his calf. It didn't just break cleanly, it exploded. The fractured bone pierced through the muscle tissue, erupting outward and puncturing the skin of Weidman's calf. The reason this seemingly routine kick turned into a brutal compound fracture is because it was bone-on-bone contact with Hall's shin, which, according to doctors, would be like kicking a concrete wall. Fortunately, the awful injury healed well enough for him to make his return to the octagon in 2023. And like the true fighter he is, Weidman has no intentions of retiring anytime soon. But there's a weird part to this story. Just 7 years before his own horrifying leg break, Chris Weidman was on the other side of the equation. In 2013, at UFC 168, it was Weidman who delivered a similar career-altering injury to his longtime rival, Anderson Silva. Silva was looking to reclaim the middleweight title he'd lost to Weidman just months earlier. Fueled by revenge, the Spider delivered his infamous leg kicks, a prominent part of his fighting style. Weidman, however, was prepared. He anticipated the attack and expertly checked one of the low kicks. But what ended up happening was something no one could have predicted. Instead of connecting with Weidman, Silva's shin met the full force of his shin guard in a gut-wrenching crack. If you look closely, you can see his legs pretty much wrap around Weidman's. Unsurprisingly, Silva fell to the canvas and began writhing in pain, trying to stabilize his leg. This injury permanently ended his time at the top of the division. While the Brazilian returned 7 more times to fight in the UFC, he was never as successful as he once was. But the good news is that, despite the horrific circumstances, both fighters have reconciled. Anderson sent Chris well wishes for a speedy recovery, while Weidman expressed remorse for the injury he inflicted years ago. Unfortunately, Silva isn't the only one who faced a brutal setback because of a checked leg kick. In 2021, Conor McGregor's controversial loss to Dustin Poirier changed the entire trajectory of his career. As the fight unfolded, McGregor, known for his lightning-fast movement, attempted to strike. In the blink of an eye, McGregor's left leg buckled beneath him with a snap. The Notorious stumbled back awkwardly, and it was clear he had suffered a horrific injury. His left tibia, the larger shin bone, had fractured in half just above the ankle. Despite the excruciating pain, McGregor displayed remarkable composure. He even managed a brief interview with Joe Rogan while medical personnel rushed to his side. But sadly for him, the fight was stopped by the doctor's stoppage, and the victory was awarded to Poirier. McGregor insists he already had stress fractures in his leg before the fight, so it wasn't because of anything Poirier did, but regardless of how it happened, this injury put him out. McGregor is planning on returning to the octagon this year, but will he fight just as skillfully? Only time can tell. While leg injuries are surprisingly common, another area that's super likely to get injured is the arm. And nobody knows this fact better than Frank Mir. After all, as the master of the Kimura submission, he has used this technique twice to achieve legendary status in MMA. The first time it happened was all the way back at UFC 35. Tim Sylvia was the reigning heavyweight champion, and he underestimated Mir's skills big time. 50 seconds into the title fight, Mir locked him in and hyperextended his arm, resulting in one of the most gut-wrenching fractures ever seen. The snapping happened because Sylvia refused to tap out until the referee called a stop to the bout when it was obvious his arm was fractured. 20 years later, that injury still haunts him, as he reports having problems with repeated infections. Another brutal fracture caused by Mir happened at UFC 140 in 2011, and this was even worse. Mir was fighting Nogueira, nicknamed Minotauro, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu legend. The turning point came early in the second round when Minotauro tried to guillotine Mir. The fighter almost appeared to be unconscious, but a few shots later, he recovered and instantly transitioned to a Kimura lock, isolating Nogueira's right arm. Nogueira, a seasoned veteran, recognized the danger immediately and fought desperately to escape. But he had too much heart to just tap out. In MMA, it's well known. You either tap or you snap. Despite Mir's size and strength, Minotauro still looked absolutely shocked when his arm popped. Kind of like he didn't believe Frank would actually do it. Fractures are always going to be a huge risk in MMA, but there are a whole range of injuries that are even more disturbing to look at. Who could forget the grotesque hematomas suffered by Joanna Jędrzejczyk at UFC 248? In 2020, the Polish fighter faced Weili Zhang in a highly anticipated rematch for the strawweight title. The fight lived up to the hype, with both fighters throwing everything they had at each other, leaving welts, cuts, bruises, and numerous other injuries. But it'd be a lie to say that they both suffered equally. Jędrzejczyk absorbed relentless punishment, particularly to her head. The blood vessels under her skin burst, and a swollen, discolored mass formed. The punching didn't stop, and her injuries just got more and more inflamed, to the point where she started looking unrecognizable. By the end of the fight, the two fighters had combined for 351 strikes landed, the third highest in UFC history. The legendary match ended with Joanna's facial features completely distorted. While the injury looked horrifying, it thankfully wasn't career-threatening. The fighter underwent surgery and recovered well, although those horrifying images will be lingering for a long time to come. While Joanna's injuries happened because of hundreds of strikes, the turning point in the fight between Matt Mitrione and Travis Browne came from an accidental eye poke. The heavyweight fight happened at UFC Fight Night 81 in 2016, and things went south from the opening bell itself. Browne is known for his super aggressive fighting style, so he repeatedly lunged forward by punching multiple times. During the first round, Browne's fingers accidentally poked Mitrione's eye. The referee stopped the fight to let a doctor check him out. But in the second round, Mitrione was poked again in the same place. The fight was stopped once more for a medical check, and then the bout continued. Unsurprisingly, Browne went to town on Mitrione's face and damaged it badly, causing the eye injury with a straight right hand. While Mitrione didn't feel any pain in the octagon, despite his eye being swollen shut by a horrifically large purple mass, further checkups revealed that he had an orbital bone fracture. Browne reportedly apologized after each accidental poke, but many fans were disappointed and claimed he should have been penalized or even disqualified. MMA fights are entertaining to watch, sure, but there's no doubt that the risk of something genuinely gory is always real. Take CFFC 94, for example, where Katagliev completely lost his finger. The Russian-Canadian fighter was in a match against Canadian prospect Devin Goodale when the gruesome moment took place. After both fighters struggled against the cage wall, it became clear that Pliev's left ring finger was missing. The referee stopped the fight, and the entire venue started looking for the stray digit. This nightmare of a situation went on for several minutes, until it was ultimately discovered that the finger had been lodged inside Pliev's glove all along. He was rushed to the ER and the finger was reattached. Apparently, he'd torn off 50% of his tendons on the finger. Losing a finger is rough. Fracturing your leg is rougher. But nothing comes close to having your skull broken open. Just ask Evangelista Santos, who suffered this life-threatening injury. It happened in the second round of his 2016 bout against Michael Page at Bellator 158. Page decided to go for a flying knee kick, where he launched himself into the air and struck his opponent with his knee. Santos didn't have enough time to react, so before he knew it, Page's knee crushed his head. At first, it looked like a typical KO, but when the doctors examined him, it was revealed that his skull had suffered a compound fracture. Online images showed the extent of the damage, and it's a complete miracle that he even survived that. However, doctors are worried that his brain will continue to swell. After 6 months of recovery, Santos decided to retire because of the risks associated with the competition. So, from the horrific skull fracture that sidelined Evangelista Santos to the agonizing break that shattered Chris Weidman's leg, those were some of the worst MMA injuries to happen during fights.